And so everyone who's ever done that has eventually expanded past the point that their system collapsed. Doesn't matter if it's the Spanish or the Romans or the Brits. Everybody. So the only thing that might work is fiat. And that's all about trust. And in a world that deglobalizes and where agriculture and energy are circumspect at best, there aren't going to be a lot of countries out there that people are willing to trust. And I see, because of that, the United States not just continuing to be the supreme currency, but really being the only one of size that's globally traded. Now, I realize that clashes with like half of the investment theses out there, but most of them are based on the idea that globalization can happen and no one will shoot at each other ever again. And I think we've put a bullet in that theory back on February 22nd pretty thoroughly. From an
Okay.
economic point of view, you're absolutely right. There's not nearly the same trust in the European Central Bank that there is in the U.S. Federal Reserve. There's not nearly as much trust among the American economy, or I'm sorry, among the European economies as there are among the American states. There's certainly not as much interest in the wider world in using the euro versus the dollar. The Europeans have shown on multiple occasions they're willing to manipulate the value of the dollar in order to achieve certain program goals, which is something the United States honestly has never done. I mean, we've got QE1 and QE2, and they were little bumps in the M2 supply, less than 1% of the total, whereas the Europeans will go by 10, 20% at any given time in order to achieve something. From an economic point of view, it doesn't work, especially if we're moving into a world where Europe is one of the most advanced aging societies ever and just doesn't have consumers. But the euro is not just an economic project, it's also a political project. And if there's any hope for Europe to not fall back into their pre-1945 habits, the euro has to be a centerpiece of that. Now, in the end, do I think that will fail? Yeah. But I would have never guessed on February 22nd that the Europeans would have stuck together as much as they have on the Ukraine war. I've been pleasantly surprised. I would love to be pleasantly surprised on the euro as well. Crypto can only work if it has regular interfaces with the real economy and it's liquid in an exchange, and it's neither of those things. Also, it can't be a currency per se because no one's in control of the money supply. Bitcoin's probably the worst example of what might theoretically work because supposedly it's available in limited volume. But no, I see no potential there. I don't see it serving a need. I don't see it having a use. It's definitely not a store of value or a medium of exchange. Now, does that mean that there is something out there that could serve all those roles? Well, yeah, we call it gold. Limited in supply, but I mean, it has all the negatives of crypto with one exception. It actually exists. It's a physical thing. And because it has industrial uses, it will always have a base value. Whereas crypto's net value, especially if we move into a world where we hope to regulate carbon at all, Bitcoin anyway, its net value is negative. It doesn't match any of the criteria for any useful economic asset. We've got plenty of methods for containing floods. I mean, the Dutch are obviously the world class at that. So there's engineering that needs to be done. And if there's anything that the Germans know how to do, it's engineer. I'm not over worried about that. My concern is when you're making a forecast based on climate change is that our data sucks. Do we know the world is heating up? Yes. Do we know that warmer water or warmer air holds more water and so can make bigger storms? Yes. I mean, that's not really disputed. But if you want to say what that means for a specific town, now you're going off the reservation. We do not have data for that. The best example I can point to is here in the United States in the summer of 2021, the city of Portland, which is normally rainy, overcast, and cool, got hotter for a 2-week period than Las Vegas has ever been. No one
Wow.
predicted that. We predict that deserts will get hotter. We predict that marshlands might expand. You know, we have these general things, but when it comes down to what happens on this square kilometer of land, we have no idea. Moving forward, that means we should expect change, but we shouldn't expect that change to be overly predictable at the urban level. So my work with climate change focuses on those grand generalities that we know that have to be true. So you raise an area by 1 degree, what does that mean for agriculture? And it's usually a balance between what you brought up, rivers and water, and temperature. We know that crops generally are fairly temperature hardy. You can raise the temperature up to 10 degrees. and they'll still be there, assuming they get enough water. And so I'm most concerned about the more arid parts of the world, which is where most of our wheat is grown. So humanity's number one crop is actually the one facing the greatest danger. So I really don't know. It,
Okay.
it strikes me as a little bit too convenient of a pattern personally. But again, this is not where I focus. I focus on deglobalization. I focus on depopulation because we know where this goes, and we know
Right.
where this has been going since the 1960s. It's just that we're finally reaching the transition period this decade. Okay, let me start by saying I'm not a CFA and I'm certainly not a day
Right.
trader. Okay, so I look for long-term trends
Absolutely.
that match up with my general analysis. So with that kind of put to the side as a caveat, I am most interested in things that are in very large markets with deep pools of liquidity, which for the moment now is really just the United States. I want products that are energy intensive in their production because in the United States, because of the shale revolution, we have the cheapest oil, the cheapest natural gas, the cheapest electricity. That's a huge competitive advantage, particularly as global supply chains break down. I look for things where their demand is demographically driven because the United States has the healthiest demography in the rich world, and Mexico has the healthiest demography in the advanced and developing world. And if the product is exportable, great. Because as supply chains globally break down, but North American ones get stronger, there's an arbitrage opportunity as well. And then, of course, because of the Ukraine war, I'm getting very, very big in the things that we need to make things that are no longer going to be flowing from the Russian system. So that's bauxite and aluminum, that's titanium, steel, pig iron, wheat, nitrogen based fertilizers, phosphate based fertilizers. If you can find any of that that is in the Western mold or specifically in an American firm that is not exposed to the former Soviet Union, that's the catch there. They're good. The problem with all of this is that it doesn't match the investment theses that have been coming out in this capital rich period where anyone can throw money at anything and it'll stick. So, like, if you want to invest in agriculture, for example, it's a global fund, and obviously it touches companies like Bungie that are very heavily invested into Ukraine and Russia, and they're losing everything. So you have to go more specific, and that's a lot more legwork. I would say overall, if you could only take one piece of advice away from this, uh, the period of bottomless supplies of capital are ending, and that means capital is going to become harder to get. And that means we're probably going to have a lot fewer financial professionals. And they're going to have to prove that they offer a value add because high frequency trading doesn't work. Broad index funds don't work. ETFs don't work in this environment. If there's less money available and there's more people who need it, the cost of that capital will rise. And if you are an investor, there's some wonderful opportunities here, but you have got to do your homework. You just can't rely on your CFA to go out and identify a half dozen funds, dump your money in, and then go and do something else. That doesn't work anymore.
Yep.
Remember when I said we don't have an economic model for where we're moving? We don't have a political model for it either. Now, in the United States and in Mexico, where the change is happening most slowly, we're going to be able to tinker with the existing system for at least another 30 years. But in Europe and East Asia, where it's in collapse now, they're going to have to figure out a new way to do all of this. So hopefully those of us who are in North America can look to the Eastern Hemisphere and learn a few things, or even if it's just a few things that we shouldn't do as a try. Uh, my biggest concern moving forward is that every time we've had a clash of economic models, especially when they've been in their infancy and just being developed, we have had conflicts. Uh, the Cold War, the German wars, at their heart, economic theory was there. It wasn't just geography. It wasn't just materials. It was about the role of the state. Well, we now get to do that on a global basis during an energy crisis and a food crisis and a financial crisis. And then I'd get home for the summer and everything was on fire. So it's just that living out in Colorado in the Highlands more matches my work schedule,
Sure.
and I love it. The thing that worries me the most is food. Um, Over the last 70 years, globalization has allowed every agricultural producer to specialize in whatever grows best in their climate. So we now have avocados in North Carolina, and we now have corn in Iowa, and Florida and, I'm sorry, California and Florida are big into orcharding, for example. If you break down the global system, people are going to be more responsible for their own food production. And that means a lot less specialization and bringing wheat back to the core of the production system.